I woke up in a hospital bed with wires on my chest and a strange heaviness in my body. The nurse smiled gently and said, "Your son already arranged your transfer to rehab." Rehab. I blinked, confused. I was supposed to go home. My home. The one I'd lived in for 42 years. Then I heard Ethan, just outside the door, his voice low but clear. Yes, the house already closed. Something inside me went cold, because I never sold my house. And in that moment, lying there, unable to even sit up, I realized my own son might have taken everything from me. If this story touches you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Have you ever trusted someone who betrayed you? And tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? The first thing I did after hearing Ethan's voice outside that hospital door was close my eyes. Not because I was tired, because I needed time to think without him seeing it. At 68 years old, you learn something important about survival. It isn't always about strength. Sometimes it's about stillness, about listening, about not reacting too quickly when something feels wrong. And everything felt wrong. When Ethan came back into the room, his expression had already shifted. The tension I had heard in his voice moments ago was gone, replaced by that careful, practiced warmth he had been using since I woke up. "There you are," he said, gently stepping closer to my bed. "How are you feeling, Mom?" I studied his face. My son had always been handsome in a soft, easy way. When he was a boy, strangers used to tell me he had kind eyes, and for most of his life, I believed that. But now looking at him, I couldn't quite find that kindness anymore. "I'm all right," I said slowly. My voice came out thinner than I expected, a little confused. "That's normal," he replied quickly. Too quickly. "The doctors said you might feel disoriented for a few days." I nodded faintly, letting him believe I accepted that. Then I asked, as gently as I could, "The nurse said something about rehab. Why would I need that? For just a fraction of a second so small, most people would miss it." Ethan hesitated, but I didn't. "It's just temporary," he said, smoothing it over. "You had a pretty serious collapse, Mom. They want to monitor you, help you regain your strength. It's the safest option. The safest option." I repeated those words silently in my mind. "When do I go home?" I asked. Ethan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's focus on getting you better first." That wasn't an answer. Before I could press further, the door opened again. Brittany walked in. She looked exactly as she always did, perfectly put together. Not a strand of her blonde hair out of place, her makeup soft but precise, her posture straight, like she had stepped out of a magazine instead of into a hospital room. "Paisley," she said with a warm tone that felt rehearsed. "Oh my goodness, you gave us such a scare." She came closer and lightly touched my arm, but there was no real weight behind it, no real feeling, just a gesture. "I'm so glad you're awake," she added. I forced a small smile. "Thank you, Brittany." I had never disliked my daughter-in-law, not at first. When Ethan introduced her years ago, she had been charming, attentive, ambitious. I thought she would be good for him. But over time, something changed. Or maybe something revealed itself. She always had opinions about my house. "You're sitting on so much value, Paisley," she would say casually during dinners. "It's honestly not smart to keep all that money tied up in property." I would laugh it off. "It's not just property, it's my home." She would smile back, but there was always a flicker in her eyes, something calculating. Now standing beside my hospital bed, that same flicker was there again. So I said carefully, "The nurse mentioned my discharge address has been updated." Brittany and Ethan exchanged a glance. Just a quick one, but I saw it. "Yes," Brittany said smoothly. "We handled that for you. The rehab center is really lovely. Private rooms, great staff. You'll be very comfortable." Comfortable, as if comfort was the point. "I wasn't planning on going to rehab," I said. Ethan stepped in quickly. "Mom, you weren't planning on collapsing either. Things change." His tone was still gentle but firmer now, controlled, guiding, managing. And suddenly, a memory surfaced. 2 months ago, Ethan had come over unannounced. He had brought folders, papers, numbers. "I've been looking into your finances," he had said, "just to help." I remember feeling uneasy even then. "I didn't ask you to do that," I told him. "I know, but you shouldn't have to deal with everything alone," he insisted. "You're not getting any younger, Mom." I didn't like the way that sounded. "I'm doing just fine," I said firmly. Then came the suggestion. "Have you thought about downsizing?" he asked. "Selling the house, moving somewhere easier to manage?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it felt absurd. "This house is my life, Ethan," I told him. "Your father and I built everything here. I'm not going anywhere." He didn't argue, but he didn't let it go either. Over the next few weeks, he kept bringing it up, softer each time, more persuasive, more strategic. "Just think about it. Not now, Ethan." "Okay, but eventually no." I had said no, clearly, more than once. And yet now, I lay in a hospital bed being told my discharge had been arranged without my consent, being told I wasn't going home, being gently but firmly redirected every time I asked a direct question. I turned my head slightly and looked at Brittany. "Who handled the paperwork?" I asked. Her smile didn't change. "Oh, just some routine coordination. The hospital, the insurance, Ethan helped manage it." "I'd like to see it," I said. Another pause. Subtle, but there. "You don't need to worry about that right now," Ethan said. "Focus on your recovery." There it was again. Control disguised as care. "I'm not worried," I said quietly. "I just want to understand." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Brittany stepped in again, her tone soothing. "Paisley, sweetheart, stress is the last thing you need. Let us handle everything for you. Let us handle everything." The words settled heavily in my chest, because suddenly I realized something that made my skin feel cold. They already were. Not helping, handling, taking over, piece by piece. I shifted slightly in the bed, ignoring the weakness in my arms. "Ethan," I said softly earlier, "I heard you on the phone." He froze. Just for a second, but it was enough. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. "You said something about the house." I continued, watching him closely. "You said it already closed." Silence filled the room. Thick. Uncomfortable. Brittany looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at me. And in that moment, I knew something had cracked. Not the truth, but the mask. "You must have misunderstood," Brittany said quickly. "Too quickly. There are a lot of conversations happening right now." "I know what I heard," I interrupted. Still calm, Ethan exhaled slowly, then stepped closer to my bed. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, "we were going to talk to you about that when you were feeling stronger." My heart began to pound. Talk to me about what he hesitated. And then he said the words that changed everything. "We finalized the sale of the house. The room didn't spin. It didn't blur. It didn't fade. It became painfully sharply clear." "No," I said, just one word. But it carried 42 years of memories. 42 years of birthdays, Christmas mornings, quiet evenings, laughter loss, life. "You agreed to it," Ethan said quickly. "You just don't remember because you weren't feeling well." I stared at him, at my son. The boy I raised, the man standing in front of me now. "I never agreed to sell my home," I said slowly. Brittany crossed her arms slightly, her voice still smooth. "There's documentation, Paisley." Everything was done properly. Properly. Legal. Clean. Those were the words they wanted me to believe. But something deep inside me, something older than fear, stronger than weakness, rose up in that moment. A quiet, steady voice. "This is wrong." And for the first time since I woke up in that hospital bed, I stopped feeling like a patient and started feeling like a woman who had just been robbed. I didn't argue with Ethan. That surprised him. I could see it in the way his shoulders eased just slightly when I didn't raise my voice or demand answers. Brittany, too, seemed to relax her posture, softening as if she believed the moment had passed, but inside me, something had shifted completely. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't weak. I was watching. "I must be more tired than I thought," I murmured, letting my eyes drift half-closed. "We can talk about it later." Ethan nodded quickly. "Of course. You need rest." Brittany gave my arm a light pat. "We'll take care of everything, Paisley. Don't worry, don't worry." The same words people use when there is everything to worry about. I waited until they left. I counted the seconds in my head, listening carefully, the door closing, their footsteps fading, the quiet hum of the hospital returning. Only then did I open my eyes fully. My heart was beating fast now, not from fear, from clarity. I turned my head slowly toward the bedside table where my phone lay. My hand trembled as I reached for it, not because I was uncertain, but because my body hadn't caught up with my mind yet. The screen lit up, dozens of missed notifications, most from Ethan, a few from unknown numbers, and then one name that made me pause. Grace Holloway. I hadn't spoken to Grace in years, but her name had stayed with me. A woman from my church had once told me in a hushed voice over coffee, "If you ever feel like something isn't right and no one believes you, call Grace." At the time I had laughed. I'd never imagined I would need someone like that, but now. I tapped her name. The phone rang once, twice. Then a calm, steady voice answered. "Grace Holloway." For a moment I didn't speak. I wasn't sure how to begin. How do you tell someone that your own child may have stolen your life from you? "This is Paisley Carter," I said finally. "I'm not sure if you remember me." A brief pause. "Then I do. We met at St. Andrew's fundraiser a few years ago." Her memory was precise, reassuring. "Yes," I said, swallowing. I need help." Her tone shifted instantly, not emotional, not alarmed, but focused. "Tell me what's happening." And so I did. Not everything, not yet, but enough. I told her I was in the hospital, that my son had arranged to send me to a rehab facility without my consent, that I overheard him say my house had been sold, that I had never agreed to that. Grace didn't interrupt once. She let me finish. Then she asked one question. "Do you feel safe right now?" I hesitated. "Yes," I said slowly. "Physically, yes. And legally?" she asked. I closed my eyes. "I don't think so." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then Grace spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Paisley, I want you to listen to me very carefully." I gripped the phone tighter. "All right, do not confront your son," she said. "Not yet." I frowned slightly. "Why not?" "Because if what you are describing is accurate, this isn't just a family disagreement," she replied. "This could be financial exploitation, possibly fraud. If they believe you're aware, they may start covering their tracks, or worse, isolate you further." A chill ran through me. "They've already arranged for me to go somewhere I didn't choose," I said quietly. "Yes," Grace said, "and that's exactly why we need to move carefully." The word steadied me. "What should I do?" I asked. First she said, "You continue exactly as you have been. You act uncertain, tired, dependent. You give them no reason to believe you're questioning anything." That went against every instinct I had, but I understood it. And second, I asked. "I start working," she said simply. "How I'll pull property records, check the sale, identify the buyer, and trace any legal documents filed in your name," she explained. "If your house was sold, there will be a trail." "There always is." I let out a slow breath. "And if everything looks legal?" I asked. "Then we look closer," she replied. "Because legality doesn't always mean legitimacy." I felt something inside me strengthen at that. "All right," I said. "What do you need from me?" "For now." "Nothing obvious," Grace said. "But if they bring you any documents to sign, you do not sign them. Not under any circumstances." Almost as if summoned by her words, there was a knock on my door. My heart skipped. "They're here," I whispered. Grace's voice dropped slightly. "Stay calm. We'll talk again soon." The call ended. I quickly placed the phone back on the table and leaned my head against the pillow, letting my eyes soften, my breathing slow. The door opened. Ethan walked in. Right on time. "Hey, Mom," he said, holding a folder in his hand. My gaze drifted lazily toward him. I murmured, as if I'd just woken up again. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said, stepping closer. "But we need to take care of a few things." My stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" I asked weakly. "Just some paperwork," he said, opening the folder. "Insurance discharge, planning, standard stuff." Standard, that word again. He pulled out a set of documents and placed them gently on the tray in front of me. "Nothing complicated," he added. "I'll walk you through it." I looked down at the papers. The words blurred slightly, not because I couldn't see them, but because I was suddenly aware of how easily they could be used against me. "How many pages is it?" I asked. "Just a few," he said quickly. I let out a small, tired sigh. "I'm sorry, Ethan," I said softly. "I don't think I can focus right now. Everything feels foggy." He hesitated, just for a moment. Then he smiled. "That's okay. We can do it later." He gathered the papers again, but not before I noticed something. At the bottom of one page, a line, a place for a signature. My signature, my pulse quickened. "Maybe tomorrow," he added. Maybe I echoed. He lingered for a second, studying my face, as if trying to decide something. Then he nodded and stepped back. "Get some rest, Mom." "I will," I said. He left the room. The door closed, and this time I didn't wait. I reached for my phone again, my hand steadier now, because I understood something clearly. They thought I was slipping. They thought I was vulnerable. They thought they were ahead of me. But they had made one mistake. They had underestimated me, and now I wasn't just trying to understand what they had done. I was going to prove it. That night I didn't sleep. Not really. My body drifted in and out of shallow rest, but my mind stayed sharp, turning over every memory like pages in a book I had once trusted, but now suspected had been rewritten without me. It's a strange feeling realizing that pieces of your life may have been quietly rearranged while you were still living in them. And the more I thought, the more things began to surface. Small things. Things I had dismissed. Things I should not have dismissed. I remembered the mail. At first it had been innocent enough. Ethan offering to help sort through it when he visited. "You get so much junk, Mom," he would say with a light laugh, flipping through envelopes before I even had the chance to see them. "Let me toss what you don't need." I had let him. Because that's what mothers do. We trust. We assume care, not control. But then I remembered something else. There were bills I hadn't seen. Statements that used to arrive regularly that suddenly stopped. When I asked about one of them, Ethan had answered quickly. "Oh, that I switched it to paperless for you. It's easier." I didn't question it. Why would I? He was my son. But now, lying there in the dim hospital room, I felt a slow, creeping realization settle into my chest. Paperless didn't mean easier. It meant invisible. I turned my head toward the window. The city lights of Columbus flickered faintly in the distance, blurred by the glass and the darkness. How much had I not seen? How much had been hidden from me in the name of convenience? Another memory surfaced. Brittany standing in my kitchen just a few weeks ago holding a cup of coffee she barely touched. "You've done such an amazing job maintaining this place," she had said, looking around with a smile that didn't quite match her eyes. "But it's a lot for one person." "I manage," I told her. "Of course you do," she replied sweetly. "But imagine how much easier your life would be without all this responsibility." Her gaze had lingered on the walls, the floors, the space, not like a guest, like someone evaluating. At the time, I felt a flicker of discomfort, but I pushed it down, because discomfort without proof feels like doubt in yourself, and I didn't want to doubt my own family. Now I understood that discomfort had been something else entirely. It had been warning. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. Then came the memory that made my stomach tighten. The notary. I had almost forgotten about it completely. It was a day when I wasn't feeling well. Feverish, lightheaded, my head thick with pressure. Ethan had insisted on taking me to urgent care. "They just want to run some tests," he said. I remember sitting in my living room afterward, exhausted, barely able to focus. And then, there had been people. A man, a woman, voices explaining something quickly. Just routine authorization. Nothing complicated. "Just sign here." I remember holding a pen. My hand had felt heavy, unsteady. "Do you understand what you're signing, Miss Carter?" someone had asked. I nodded, because I thought I did. Or maybe because I trusted Ethan standing beside me, telling me it was fine. That memory hit me like cold water, because now I wasn't sure I had understood anything at all. A soft knock on the door pulled me back to the present. "Come in," I said. A nurse stepped inside, checking my monitors with quiet efficiency. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked kindly. "Too much on my mind," I replied. She smiled gently. "That's understandable. You've been through a lot, if only she knew." After she left, I reached for my phone again. My fingers hovered over Grace's name for a moment before I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Paisley. I remembered something I said immediately. "Tell me." I took a breath and explained the notary visit. The fever. The confusion, the signatures, the people I didn't recognize. Grace didn't interrupt, but when I finished, her tone shifted, more focused, more precise. "That's important," she said. "Very important. You think that's when it happened?" I asked. "It's very possible," she replied, "especially if they needed documentation to support the sale." My chest tightened. I didn't know what I was signing. "I believe you," Grace said. "And if we can prove you were not in a clear mental state, that changes everything. How do we prove it?" "Medical records," she said. "We'll need to establish your condition on that specific date, medication, symptoms, cognitive capacity." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "And the documents?" I asked. "I've already started pulling them," she said. "The sale paperwork has been filed. Your signature is on it." My heart dropped, but she continued. There are inconsistencies. I sat up slightly, ignoring the strain in my muscles. What kind of inconsistencies? The signature itself, Grace said. It's similar but not consistent with your usual handwriting. It's shaky in a way that suggests impairment or pressure. I closed my eyes. I could see it. My hand trembling, my mind fogged, trusting the wrong person. There are also 2 witnesses listed, she added. Names I'm currently verifying. I don't know them, I said immediately. I didn't expect you would, Grace replied. A silence settled between us, heavy. Then I asked the question that had been building inside me. Grace, what exactly did they use? She didn't hesitate. A temporary power of attorney, she said. The words hit harder than I expected. What a legal document that allows someone to act on your behalf, she explained. In this case, it appears your son was granted limited authority enough to facilitate the sale. I never agreed to that, I said firmly. I know, she replied. But if they obtained your signature under compromised conditions, they could argue that you did. I felt anger rise in my chest. Not loud, not explosive, cold, controlled. They used me, I said quietly. Yes, Grace said, but they made mistakes. I opened my eyes. What kind of mistakes? They moved too fast, she replied, and they assumed you wouldn't question it. A small, steady strength began to form inside me. They assumed wrong, I said. I believe so, Grace answered. I took a deep breath. What happens next? I keep digging, she said, and you keep doing exactly what you're doing, playing the role they expect. I nodded again. I can do that. I know you can, she said. The call ended. I placed the phone back down slowly. The room felt different now. Not safer, but clearer. Because the fog was lifting. Piece by piece, the truth was taking shape. They had taken my trust, my home, my voice. But they had made one critical mistake. They thought I would stay silent. They thought I would stay weak. They thought I wouldn't remember. But I did. And now, I wasn't just remembering. I was waking up. The next morning, everything felt sharper. Not easier, but clearer. There is a certain kind of pain that once fully recognized stops being confusing. It becomes focused, directed, almost useful. I wasn't drifting anymore. I was waiting, watching, and when my phone lit up with Grace's name just after 9 a.m., I answered immediately. Paisley, she said, without preamble. I've found the buyer. My fingers tightened around the phone. Who is it? Not a person, she replied. An LLC. I frowned. What does that mean? It means your house wasn't sold to a family or an individual, Grace explained. It was sold to a company, specifically a limited liability corporation. That's often used in real estate investments. A cold unease spread through me. Investment, I repeated. You mean flipped, possibly, she said. But that's not the concerning part. I swallowed. What is? There was a brief pause before she answered. The LLC traces back to someone connected to your daughter-in-law. The air left my lungs. Brittany, I whispered. Yes, Grace said. More specifically, her brother, Kyle Bennett. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Kyle. I had met him only a handful of times. Loud, confident, always talking about deals, properties, opportunities. The kind of man who measured success in square footage and profit margins. He had walked through my house once about a year ago, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the rooms like he was already calculating something. At the time, I told myself I was imagining it. Now I knew I wasn't. They planned this, I said quietly. Yes, Grace replied. And there's more. I closed my eyes, briefly bracing myself. The house was sold significantly below market value, she continued. At least 20% under what it should have gone for. Why would they do that? I asked. To move it quickly, she said, and possibly to keep it within a controlled circle. If Kyle's company bought it, they could resell it later at full value or higher and pocket the difference. My chest tightened. So they didn't just take my house, I said slowly. They positioned it as an asset, Grace said, one they could manipulate. I leaned back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling. All those years, all those memories, reduced to an opportunity. I want to understand something, I said after a moment. If everything looks legal on paper, how do we fight it? Grace's voice remained steady. We challenge how those documents were obtained, she said. Your medical condition, the circumstances of the signing, the relationships between the parties involved, and now the connection between the buyer and your family. I nodded slowly. That connection matters, I said. It matters a lot, she replied, because it suggests this wasn't an independent transaction. It was coordinated. The word echoed in my mind. This wasn't panic. This wasn't desperation. This was planning. And suddenly, memories of Brittany began to rearrange themselves in a new light. The way she used to linger in conversations about money. The way she would casually bring up real estate trends. You know, properties in your area have gone up almost 30%, she once told me over dinner. You're sitting on a gold mine. I had smiled politely. I'm sitting in my home, I corrected her. She had laughed, but there was something behind it, something I hadn't wanted to name. Now I could. Calculation. I exhaled slowly. Grace, do you think Ethan knew all of this? There was a pause. I think she said carefully that your son may not have started this plan, but he became part of it. That hurt more than I expected, not because I hadn't already suspected it, but because hearing it spoken aloud made it real. He always trusted Brittany, I said quietly. He followed her lead in a lot of things. That may be true, Grace replied, but involvement is still involvement. I closed my eyes. I remembered Ethan as a boy, running through the backyard, laughing, calling out, "Mom, look at this." That boy felt so far away now. What do we do next? I asked. I keep building the case, Grace said, and you stay exactly where you are in control of what they think you know. I let out a small, steady breath. I can do that. I know you can, she said. The call ended. I sat in silence for a long moment, letting everything settle. Then there was a knock at the door. I didn't need to guess who it was. Come in, I said. Brittany stepped inside first, followed by Ethan. She was holding a small bouquet of flowers. White lilies, too elegant for a hospital room. I thought these might brighten your day, she said, placing them on the table. Thank you, I replied. Ethan pulled a chair closer to my bed and sat down. How are you feeling today? He asked. Better, I said truthfully. Not physically, but mentally. That's good, he said, smiling. I looked at him carefully, at the man who had once cried when he scraped his knee, at the man who had just sold my home. I've been thinking, I said gently. His posture shifted slightly. About what? About the house, I replied. Brittany and Ethan exchanged a quick glance. There it was again, that silent communication. I want to understand the process, I continued. Who handled the sale? Ethan cleared his throat. A real estate group, he said. They made things simple. What group? I asked. Brittany stepped in smoothly. It's not important, Paisley. Everything was handled professionally. I held her gaze. I'm sure it was, I said calmly, but I'd still like to know. A brief pause. Then Ethan said, it was an investment company. Do they have a name? I asked. Another pause. Brittany smiled. You're worrying about details that don't matter, she said lightly. The important thing is that you're taken care of. Taken care of. Again, always that phrase, as if my life had been reduced to a condition they were managing. I nodded slowly. Of course, I said. Then I leaned back slightly, letting my voice soften. I suppose I'm just trying to make sense of everything, I added. It all happened so fast. Ethan relaxed a little. That's understandable, he said. Brittany reached out and adjusted the blanket over me. You don't need to figure it all out right now, she said. That's what we're here for. I looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time, I didn't see a daughter-in-law. I saw someone who had walked into my life with a plan, someone who had seen my home not as a place, but as leverage. You've done a lot, I said quietly. Her smile widened slightly. We're family, she replied. Family. The word felt different now, heavier, sharper. I nodded again. Yes, I said, we are. But inside, I knew something they didn't. This wasn't over, not even close, because now I wasn't just a woman recovering in a hospital bed. I was a woman who understood exactly what had been done to her. And more importantly, I was a woman who had just started to fight back. The rehab center smelled like lemon disinfectant and quiet resignation. That was the first thing I noticed when they wheeled me in 2 days later. Not pain, not fear, resignation. The kind that hangs in the air of places where people are expected to wait to heal, wait to improve, wait for someone else to decide what happens next. Ethan walked beside the wheelchair, his hand resting lightly on the handle, as if guiding me was both his duty and his right. You're going to like it here, he said. It's one of the best facilities in Columbus. I didn't answer. Instead, I let my gaze drift across the lobby, neutral colors, soft lighting, carefully arranged furniture, designed to look comforting but not personal. No one stayed here because they wanted to. They stayed because someone else decided they should. Brittany followed a few steps behind, scrolling through her phone, only occasionally glancing up with a polite smile for the staff. Everything about her said efficiency. Everything about Ethan said control. Everything about me said compliance. At least that's what they believed. Paisley Carter, a nurse, asked, stepping forward. Yes, Ethan answered for me. I noticed that. I noticed everything now. She'll be in room 214, the nurse said. We'll take good care of her. I'm sure you will. Brittany replied smoothly. I was wheeled down a quiet hallway past doors that were either slightly open or firmly closed. Voices murmured in the distance. A television played somewhere too loud for the room it was in. When we reached my room, Ethan helped adjust the bed, while Brittany arranged a few personal items on the small dresser things. She had chosen not things I had asked for. I brought some of your clothes, she said. Just what you'll need. Just what you'll need. Not what you want. I looked at the small suitcase. It was lighter than it should have been. How long will I be here, I asked. Ethan hesitated. Just until you're strong enough, he said. That wasn't an answer, but I nodded anyway, because the less I resisted, the more they relaxed, and the more they relaxed, the more they revealed. After they left, the room felt too quiet. I waited. 5 minutes, 10. Then I reached for my phone. Grace answered on the first ring. I'm in the rehab center, I said. I expected that, she replied. How are you exactly where they want me? I said. Good, she said. I blinked. Good, yes, Grace continued, because now they believe you're contained. That gives us space to move. I let that sink in. Space. Freedom disguised as limitation. What have you found? I asked. There was a slight shift in her tone. More serious now. I've been tracing the financial side, she said. And Paisley, it's bigger than just the house. My grip tightened on the phone. Tell me. The proceeds from the sale didn't go directly to your son, she explained. They were routed through multiple accounts first. Why would they do that? To obscure the trail, she said simply. A cold wave passed through me. And where did the money end up? A portion landed in an account linked to Brittany, Grace said. Another portion moved through a business account tied to Kyle's LLC. I closed my eyes. Of course it did. And Ethan, I asked. He received some of it, she replied, but not the majority. That surprised me. Why not? Because this may not have been his plan, Grace said, but he enabled it. I exhaled slowly. Enabled. The word felt accurate, painfully accurate. There's more, Grace added. My chest tightened. What else? I found irregular withdrawals from one of your personal savings accounts, she said. My eyes snapped open. What small amounts at first, she continued. Nothing that would immediately trigger concern, but consistent. Over time, they add up. My heart began to pound. I didn't authorize those. I know, she said. And based on the pattern, I believe someone had access to your online banking. I didn't need to ask who. Ethan had insisted on helping me set it up last year. It was easier, he said. Easier, invisible, controllable. They've been taking from me for a while, I whispered. Yes, Grace confirmed. The words settled heavily in the air between us. Not just one betrayal. Not just one decision, a pattern, a process, a slow, deliberate taking. How much? I asked. I'm still calculating, she said. But it's significant. I swallowed hard. My house, I said quietly. My savings. What else? Grace didn't answer immediately. And that silence told me everything. They weren't finished, I said. No, she replied. I looked around the room. The neutral walls, the neatly made bed, the small window that didn't quite open all the way. They put me here to keep me out of the way, I said. Yes, Grace said. So I wouldn't see anything, I added. Yes, so I wouldn't stop them. Another pause. Yes. I sat there, the phone pressed tightly to my ear, feeling something shift inside me again. Not fear, not confusion, something colder, something clearer. They underestimated me, I said. They did. Grace agreed. I took a slow breath. What's our next move? We continue gathering evidence, she said. I'm building a full financial timeline. And Paisley, once we have enough, we bring in legal counsel. I nodded. I know someone, I said. Margaret Pierce. There was a brief pause. The elder law attorney, Grace asked. Yes, she's very good, Grace said. If she takes your case, they'll have a problem. Good, I said quietly. After we ended the call, I sat in silence for a long moment. Then there was a knock on the door. "Come in," I said. Ethan stepped inside, alone this time. "Hey, Mom," he said, offering a small smile. "Settling in okay?" I looked at him, really looked at him, the man who had helped orchestrate this, the man who had slowly taken from me while calling it care. "I'm adjusting," I said. He nodded, stepping closer. "That's good," he said. "This is the best place for you right now." I tilted my head slightly. "Is it?" I asked softly. He hesitated, just for a second, then he recovered. "Of course," he said. I held his gaze, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes. Not confidence, not control, something else, something small, but growing. Doubt, because somewhere deep down, he knew. This wasn't over, and neither was I. The next step was the hardest one so far, not because it required strength, but because it required me to accept fully and without illusion that I was no longer dealing with a misunderstanding. I was dealing with betrayal, calculated, layered, and deliberate. And betrayal like that doesn't fix itself. It has to be confronted, carefully, strategically, which is why 2 days after I arrived at the rehab center, I made the call. Margaret Maggie Pierce answered on the 3rd ring. "This is Maggie Pierce." Her voice was exactly as I remembered, calm, precise, and carrying a quiet authority that didn't need to be announced. "Maggie, this is Paisley Carter," I said. There was a brief pause. Then Paisley, "I didn't expect to hear from you like this." "Neither did I replied. I didn't waste time. I told her everything, not in fragments, not in hesitation, but clearly. From the hospital, to the sale, to the notary, to the LLC tied to Brittany's brother, to the missing money. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was silence. Then Maggie exhaled slowly. "Paisley," she said, "you did the right thing calling me." My grip tightened slightly around the phone. "Tell me honestly," I said. "How bad is this?" Her answer came without hesitation. "It's serious," she said, "but it's also very actionable." Actionable. That word gave me something I hadn't felt in days. Control. "What can we do?" I asked. "A lot," she replied, "but we need to move quickly and carefully." I leaned back against the pillow, focusing on every word. "First," she said, "we secure your financial accounts. No further withdrawals, no additional transfers." "That can be done," I said. Grace already started tracing the activity. "Good," Maggie replied. "Second, we obtain your full medical records, especially from the period when those documents were signed." "I was medicated," I said. "Feverish, disoriented. That helps us," she said. "If we can establish that you lacked clear capacity at the time, any agreement you signed can be challenged." A small, steady sense of validation settled in my chest. "I knew something wasn't right," I murmured. "And you were right," Maggie said firmly. "That mattered more than I expected, because for a moment I had doubted myself. Not anymore." "What about the house?" I asked. "We filed to challenge the transaction," she said. "Given the connection between the buyer and your family, plus the circumstances under which the documents were obtained, we have strong grounds. And if they argue everything was legal—" "They will," Maggie said. "But legality is not immunity, especially not when coercion or fraud is involved." I nodded slowly. "All right." Third, she continued, "we document everything. Every interaction, every conversation, every detail you remember." "I've started doing that," I said. "Good," she replied. "Because cases like this are built on patterns, not just moments." Patterns, yes. That's exactly what this was. Not a single decision, a sequence, a strategy. And Paisley Maggie added her voice, softening just slightly. "I need you to prepare yourself for something." My chest tightened. "What is it?" "This is going to get uncomfortable," she said. "They will push back. They may try to manipulate you emotionally. They may try to make you feel guilty." A bitter, quiet understanding rose in me. "They've already started," I said. "I expected as much," she replied. I took a slow breath. "I can handle it. I believe you can," she said. When the call ended, I sat there for a long moment, letting everything settle. For the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting. I was acting. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," I said. Ethan stepped inside. Again. He had been visiting more frequently now, checking, watching, maybe even worrying. "How are you today?" he asked. "Better," I said truthfully. "Not physically, but mentally. Stronger, clearer, more aware. "That's good," he said, pulling the chair closer. "The staff says you're improving." "I am," I replied. He smiled, but there was something strained about it now, something uncertain. He was starting to feel it. The shift. "I've been thinking about everything he said." I tilted my head slightly. "Have you?" "Yeah," he continued, "and I want you to understand that everything I've done, it's been for you." There it was, the justification, the narrative. I held his gaze. "What exactly have you done for me, Ethan?" I asked quietly. He hesitated, just for a second, then he leaned forward slightly. "I made sure you were safe," he said, "that you didn't have to worry about the house, the bills, the upkeep. I never asked you to take those things from me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was firm, clear, unshaken. His expression flickered. "I didn't take anything," he said quickly. "You agreed I was sick," I interrupted. Silence. The air between us tightened. "You don't remember clearly," he said, his tone shifting slightly. The doctors said I was disoriented," I replied. "Not incapable," another pause. This one longer, more uncomfortable. Because now, he was the one adjusting. "You're overthinking this," he said finally. I almost smiled. "Because that's what people say when they're losing control of the story." "No," I said softly. "I'm finally thinking clearly." His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw something in him that hadn't been there before. Not confidence, not control, pressure. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, "you don't understand how hard things have been." There it was, the shift from justification to justification wrapped in victimhood. I studied him carefully. "How hard?" I asked. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "There are things you don't know," he said. "Financial stuff, responsibilities, pressure, and you thought selling my home would solve that?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. "I thought it would help everyone," he said finally. "Everyone, not me, everyone." I nodded slowly. "I see." He leaned back in the chair, watching me now, trying to read me, trying to figure out what I knew, what I didn't, and more importantly, what I was going to do. "You trust me, don't you?" he asked suddenly. The question hung in the air, heavy, fragile. Once I would have answered without hesitation, without doubt, but now I chose my words carefully. "I trusted you," I said, past tense. His expression changed, subtly but undeniably, and in that moment, something shifted between us, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Because trust once broken doesn't crack. It separates, cleanly, irreversibly. "I'm trying to fix things," he said quietly. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see my son. I saw a man standing in the consequences of his own choices. "Then start by telling the truth," I said. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Because the truth was no longer something he could control. And neither was I. After Ethan left that afternoon, the room felt quieter than usual. Not peaceful, just honest. There's a difference. Peace comes when things are resolved. Honesty comes when illusions are gone. And I no longer had any illusions left. I sat by the window for a long time, watching people move in the parking lot, below visitors coming and going, nurses taking quick breaks, families arriving with flowers or leaving with worry etched into their faces. Life continued, even when yours felt like it had been paused and rewritten without your consent. My phone buzzed softly beside me. "Grace," I answered immediately. "I've got more," she said. Something in her tone told me this wouldn't be easy to hear. "I'm ready," I replied. There was a brief pause, as if she were choosing her words carefully. "I tracked down the notary listed on your documents," she said, "and one of the witnesses." My fingers tightened slightly around the phone. "And they've both been involved in multiple questionable transactions," she continued. "Not illegal on the surface, but patterned. Repeated appearances in deals involving elderly homeowners, rapid property transfers, and limited documentation transparency." A chill ran through me. "They do this often," I said. "Yes," Grace confirmed. "Not necessarily together every time, but within overlapping networks." Networks. That word made everything feel larger, more organized, more intentional. "This wasn't random," I said quietly. "No," she replied. "It rarely is." I leaned my head back against the chair, staring at the ceiling. They knew exactly what they were doing. "Yes." "And Ethan?" I hesitated. "He knew who they were." Another pause. I can't prove that yet, Grace said carefully. But given the connection through Brittany and her brother, it's unlikely he was completely unaware. I closed my eyes. Unaware. That word felt like a thin shield, one that didn't hold much weight anymore. What else, I asked. There's financial information you need to hear, she said. My stomach tightened. Go on. I pulled credit records connected to Ethan, she said. And Paisley, he's been in serious debt. I sat up slightly. What kind of debt? Multiple credit cards maxed out, she explained. A failed business investment about 2 years ago, and at least one private loan with aggressive repayment terms. I frowned. He never told me any of that. I didn't think he would, Grace said. I let out a slow breath. How bad is it? Bad enough that he was under pressure, she said. Consistent pressure. That explains something. Not everything, but something. And Brittany, I asked. Grace didn't hesitate. Spending far beyond their means, she said. Luxury purchases, travel, high-end retail activity. There's a pattern of maintaining an image that doesn't match their financial reality. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was painfully predictable. She always cared about appearances, I murmured. Yes, Grace said, and appearances cost money. I stared out the window again, my reflection faintly visible in the glass. So they were drowning, I said slowly, and my house looked like a way out. That's one way to interpret it, Grace replied. I shook my head slightly. No, I said, it's not just that. What do you mean? I took a breath. If it was just desperation, they would have asked me, I said. They would have come to me, explained, begged if they had to. I paused, but they didn't. No, Grace agreed. They planned it, I continued. They went around me. They made decisions for me. They treated me like I was already gone. The words hung in the air, heavy, true. Grace didn't respond immediately. Then she said quietly, that's often how these situations unfold. I closed my eyes, and suddenly another memory surfaced. One I hadn't fully processed before. It was late, maybe 3 months ago. Ethan and Brittany were in the kitchen. They didn't know I was in the hallway. I'm telling you, it's just sitting there, Brittany was saying. All that value locked up in that house. It's her house, Ethan replied. For now, Brittany said. There had been a pause. Then she added softer but sharper. Eventually, it's going to be yours anyway. Why wait until it's harder to deal with? I remember standing there frozen. Something about that conversation had unsettled me deeply, but when I walked into the kitchen, they both smiled like nothing had happened. I had told myself I misunderstood, that I was being sensitive, that I shouldn't assume the worst. Now I knew. I hadn't misunderstood anything. They were talking about it months ago, I said quietly. What Grace asked. I told her about the conversation. Every word I could remember. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. That's important, she said. Why? Because it shows intent, she replied. Planning, awareness. This wasn't a last-minute decision. No, it wasn't. It was something they had been building toward, step by step, quietly, patiently. Grace. I said, my voice steady now. I need to know something. Go ahead. Do people like this ever stop on their own? There was no hesitation in her answer. No. I nodded. I had expected that. Then we don't wait, I said. No, she agreed. We don't. After the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Not overwhelmed, not broken, just clear. Because clarity, once it settles in, doesn't leave much room for doubt. Later that evening, there was another knock on the door. Come in, I said. Ethan stepped inside, alone again. He looked tired, more than before. There were faint shadows under his eyes, and his usual confidence seemed thinner. Hey, he said quietly. Hi, I replied. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it for a moment as if gathering his thoughts. Then he walked over and sat down. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, he began. About what I asked. About trust, he said. I watched him carefully, and I prompted. He ran a hand over his face. I know things don't look good right now, he admitted, but you have to understand I didn't do this to hurt you. I tilted my head slightly. Then why did you do it? I asked. He hesitated, struggled, then finally said, because things got out of control. There it was. Not an explanation, an admission, what kind of things I asked. He exhaled slowly. Money, he said, bills, pressure, it just kept building. And you thought taking from me would fix that, I asked. I thought it would stabilize everything he said quickly, just temporarily. I was going to make it right. I looked at him, really looked at him. And how are you going to do that? I asked softly. He didn't answer, because there was no real answer, just hope, just justification, just delay. I didn't think it would go this far, he said finally, but it had, and somewhere along the way, he had allowed it. I leaned back slightly, my voice calm. You didn't think about me, I said. He looked up. I did. No. I interrupted gently. You thought about the problem. You thought about the pressure. You thought about the solution. I paused. But you didn't think about me. Silence filled the room, thick, unavoidable, because this time, there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to hide behind, and for the first time, Ethan had no defense. That night, I made a decision, not an emotional one, not one driven by anger or pain, but a deliberate, careful choice. If I wanted the truth, I needed them to give it to me, and the only way they would do that was if they believed I had stopped fighting. The next morning, I called Grace. I'm ready, I said. For what she asked, to let them talk, I replied. There was a pause. Then explain. I'm going to invite them here, I said. Both of them, Ethan and Brittany. I'll tell them I don't want conflict, that I'm tired, that I just want peace. Grace didn't respond immediately, and she prompted. And I'll let them explain themselves, I continued, without pushing, without accusing, just listening. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Grace said quietly, You're setting a trap. Yes, it's risky, she warned. I know, I said, but they were already careful. If we push too hard, they'll shut down. I need them to feel safe. Grace exhaled slowly. If we do this, she said we do it properly. What do you mean I coordinate with Maggie, she replied. We make sure everything is documented legally. Any conversation that becomes evidence must be obtained the right way. Understood, I said. And Paisley, she added, her tone firm, you have to stay in control. No emotional reactions, no confrontation. Let them talk. I can do that, I said. I believe you can, she replied. We ended the call. I sat for a moment steadying myself. Then I sent Ethan a message. I think we should talk, all of us. I don't want to fight anymore, he replied within minutes. Of course, Mom. Whatever you need. Of course. The words felt almost hollow now. By late afternoon, they arrived, together. Brittany entered first, her expression carefully softened, followed by Ethan, who looked tense but hopeful. Paisley Brittany said gently, stepping closer, We're so glad you reached out. I smiled faintly. I'm tired of tension, I said. I just want to understand. That was all it took. I saw it happen instantly. Their shoulders relaxed, their eyes softened. The guard lowered. Ethan pulled his chair closer. Of course, he said. We want that too. Brittany sat beside him, crossing her legs neatly, her posture composed. Let's just talk openly, she added. Openly. I almost found that ironic. I don't want to argue, I said softly. I just want clarity. Ethan nodded quickly. Absolutely. I folded my hands gently in my lap. Can you explain how everything happened, I asked? Simple. Neutral. Inviting. Ethan glanced at Brittany, then back at me. Well, it started with concerns about your safety, he said. You've been living alone and after your health scare. And the house, I asked quietly. He hesitated, then continued. We thought it would be better to simplify things, reduce the burden on you. I nodded slowly. And selling my home was part of that, yes, he said. It made sense financially. Brittany leaned in slightly. It wasn't an easy decision, she added, but it was the most practical one. Practical. That word again. I kept my expression calm. Who found the buyer, I asked. Ethan shifted slightly. A real estate group, he said. Brittany smiled smoothly. They specialize in quick transactions, she added. I see, I said. Then I tilted my head slightly. And the timing, I asked. It all happened very quickly. Brittany's smile didn't falter. We had to move fast, she said. Opportunities like that don't wait. Opportunities. There it was. Not necessity, not care. Opportunity. I let a small silence settle. Then I spoke again, softer now. I just wish I had understood everything at the time, I said. Ethan leaned forward. You agreed, Mom, he said. You just don't remember clearly. I looked at him, gently. I was sick, I said. Yes, but I was medicated. I continued. He stopped. Brittany stepped in. You were still capable of making decisions, she said smoothly. I nodded slowly. Maybe I said, then I let my voice soften further, but I don't remember giving anyone permission to sell my home. Silence, a brief one, but enough. Because now, they were thinking, adjusting, choosing their words more carefully. Good, that meant they were close. I shifted slightly in my seat. I don't want to fight about it, I said. What's done is done. That was the moment. I saw it. The shift, relief, immediate, subtle, but unmistakable. Brittany's posture relaxed completely. Ethan exhaled almost imperceptibly. And just like that, they believed me. I'm glad you see it that way, Brittany said. Me too, Ethan added. I nodded. I just want honesty moving forward, I said. Of course, Ethan said. Absolutely, Brittany echoed. I let another pause settle. Then I asked, almost casually, were you planning this for a long time? Ethan blinked. Brittany's eyes flickered. Just for a second, no. Ethan said quickly. It was just things came together. I tilted my head. Really, Brittany smiled. It's not something you plan step by step, she said. It's more about recognizing the right moment. The right moment. I let that sit. Then I said quietly, it just felt very prepared. Another pause. Then Brittany made the mistake. It had to be, she said. We couldn't risk delays, especially if you decided to change the trust. The words landed between us, heavy, final. I didn't move, didn't react, but inside, everything sharpened. Because I had never told them that. Never mentioned changing my trust. Not once. Ethan turned toward her slightly. Brittany. But it was too late. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was realization. I looked at her calmly. What do you mean? I asked. She hesitated. Just for a second, then recovered. I mean, in general, she said. People make changes all the time, but the damage was done. I nodded slowly. Of course, I said. Then I leaned back slightly, letting my body relax. I'm glad we talked, I added softly. Ethan nodded. Me too. Brittany smiled. Yes, this is good. I looked at both of them, at the people who thought they had everything under control, at the people who believed I had accepted what they had done, and I smiled, because what they didn't know was that the truth they had just revealed would be the thing that brought everything down. The moment they left the room, I didn't move. Not right away. I stayed exactly where I was, hands folded loosely in my lap, eyes resting on the door that had just closed behind them. Anyone watching would have thought I was simply tired again, but inside, everything was moving. Every word Brittany had said replayed in perfect clarity, especially if you decided to change the trust. She hadn't slipped. Not really. She'd revealed something she assumed was already understood, that they had been thinking ahead, planning around possibilities I hadn't even spoken aloud, and that changed everything. My phone buzzed softly beside me. Grace. I picked it up without hesitation. I heard enough, she said. Her voice was low controlled, but there was a current beneath it, something sharp, something certain. You were listening, I asked. Yes, she replied. Maggie arranged everything properly. We're covered. I closed my eyes briefly, letting relief pass through me. Then you heard what Brittany said, I murmured. I did, Grace confirmed. And Paisley, that was significant. How significant, I asked. Very, she said. She referenced knowledge she shouldn't have had unless there was prior planning around your estate. That supports premeditation. Premeditation. The word settled into me like a weight, but also like a weapon. So we can use it, I asked. Yes, Grace said. Along with everything else we've gathered, it strengthens the case considerably. I leaned back against the chair, exhaling slowly. For the first time since this began, I felt the shift. Not just emotionally, strategically. They were no longer ahead. What happens now? I asked. We move forward, Grace said. Maggie is already preparing emergency filings. For what? To freeze any remaining assets tied to your accounts, she explained, and to formally challenge the property transfer. I nodded. Will that stop them? It will slow them, she said. And more importantly, it forces everything into the open. The open, where lies don't hold as easily. Good, I said quietly. After we ended the call, I sat for a long time letting the silence settle around me again, but it felt different now. Not heavy, not uncertain, purposeful. Later that evening, my phone rang. Ethan. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Hello, Mom, he said, his voice tight. We need to talk. I kept my tone calm. We already talked today. I know, but something's come up, he said. I could hear it now, the tension, the shift. What kind of something, I asked. A legal notice, he said. Did you file something? There it was? The first crack. I didn't answer immediately. I don't know what you're referring to, I said evenly. Mom, he pressed, don't do that. We just agreed to move forward peacefully. I almost smiled, because peace to him meant silence. No, Ethan, I said softly. We agreed to honesty. There was a pause. Then this isn't honesty. This is escalation. No, I replied. This is clarity. His breathing grew heavier on the other end. You're bringing outsiders into this, he said. Lawyers, investigators, this is family. We should handle it ourselves. Family, again. The word he reached for when he needed leverage. When you sold my house, I said quietly, did you think of this as a family matter? Silence. Thick, unavoidable. That was different, he said finally. No, I replied, it wasn't. Another pause, longer this time. Mom, he said, his voice shifting softer now. You don't understand how complicated this is. I closed my eyes. I understand more than you think I said. Then you know this could get messy, he continued. Legal battles, public records, it could affect everything, everything. Meaning him, meaning Brittany, meaning the image they had built. I'm not the one who made it messy, I said. You're making it worse, he insisted. I let out a slow breath. Ethan, I said gently, when did I stop being your mother? The question landed between us, heavy, sharp, real. He didn't answer immediately, and when he did, his voice was quieter. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked. I did what I thought was necessary, he said, for who I asked. He hesitated. For everyone, he replied. Everyone. Again, not me, never me. I heard Brittany today, I said calmly. His breath caught. What do you mean she mentioned the trust? I continued. Something I never discussed with either of you. Silence. Then she didn't mean anything by that, he said quickly. Then how did she know to say it? I asked. No answer, because there wasn't one. Ethan. I said softly, this didn't start in the hospital. It didn't start with my collapse. This was already in motion. That's not it, I interrupted gently. Another silence. This one different. Not defensive, not reactive, just still. Because somewhere inside him, the truth was catching up. I didn't plan everything he said, finally. There it was. Not denial, not fully, just distance. I believe that, I said. He exhaled as if relieved. But you participated, I added. The relief vanished. You don't know what it was like, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. The pressure, the debt, so you took from me, I said. I was going to fix it, he insisted. How, I asked. He didn't answer because he couldn't, because there had never been a real plan, just a hope that consequences could be delayed. I didn't think you'd fight it, he admitted quietly. The honesty in that moment was almost more painful than the betrayal. You thought I wouldn't notice, I said. I thought... He hesitated, then finished, you wouldn't understand. I opened my eyes, and for the first time, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. You're right, I said. He paused. I don't understand. There was silence on the line, because that wasn't the answer he expected. I don't understand how you looked at me, I continued, and decided I was something you could manage. My voice remained calm, steady, but every word carried weight. I don't understand how you convinced yourself that taking my home was helping me. He didn't speak. And I don't understand, I added softly, how you thought this would end. The silence stretched. Then finally he said, It's gone too far, hasn't it? I let out a quiet breath. Yes, I said. There was no argument after that. No more justification, just the sound of a man realizing too late that the story he told himself was no longer holding. I'll call you later, he said finally. All right, I replied. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly and sat there, not shaking, not breaking, just still. Because something had shifted, not just in the case, but in him. And once doubt enters, it doesn't leave easily, especially when the truth is already standing at the door. The call with Ethan lingered in my mind long after the line went silent, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. There is a moment quiet, almost invisible, when a person stops defending themselves and starts realizing they can't. I had heard that moment in his voice, and I knew what it meant. The truth was no longer something he could reshape. It was something he had to face. 2 nights later, I saw it with my own eyes. It was late. The rehab center had settled into its usual nighttime rhythm, dimmed lights. Soft footsteps in the hallway, the distant hum of machines and televisions left on for comfort. I was awake. I had been sleeping less these days, not from anxiety, from awareness. Every sound meant something, every movement mattered. So when I heard a soft knock at my door well past visiting hours, I knew it wasn't routine. "Come in," I said quietly. The door opened slowly. Ethan stepped inside, alone, again. But this time, he looked different. Not just tired, not just tense, unraveled. His hair was slightly disheveled, his shirt wrinkled as if he hadn't bothered to change properly, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not control, not justification, something closer to collapse. "Mom," he said, closing the door behind him. His voice was low, unsteady. I sat up slightly in bed. "What are you doing here this late?" I asked. "I needed to see you," he replied. He didn't sit right away. He stood there for a moment as if unsure what to do with himself. Then he finally pulled the chair closer and dropped into it, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled sharply. "I messed up," he said, just like that. No build-up, no defense, no explanation. The words hung in the air, simple, heavy, true. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence sit. Because sometimes, people need to hear their own words echo back at them. How I asked quietly. He let out a bitter, almost humorless laugh. "How didn't I?" he muttered. I watched him carefully. This wasn't the man who had been sitting confidently in my hospital room days ago. This was someone else. Someone stripped of certainty. "It started with the money," he said finally. I didn't interrupt. He needed to say it. "All of it," he continued. "The business, the loans, the credit cards. I thought I could handle it. I always thought I could fix things before they got out of control." He ran a hand through his hair. "But they didn't stop," he added. "The payments kept coming, the interest kept growing, and then Brittany started pushing. There it was, the name, the influence. She said we were sitting on a solution," he continued, "that your house, it could solve everything, not just the debt, but give us a fresh start." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Not surprise. Confirmation, and you agreed," I said. He shook his head quickly. "Not at first," he said. "I told her it wasn't right, that it was your home, that we couldn't just—" He stopped. "Because the rest was obvious." "But you did," I said softly. He closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." Silence filled the room. Not tense, not explosive, just real. "She said we'd handle it cleanly," he continued. "That we'd make sure everything looked legitimate, that you wouldn't even have to worry about anything." I let out a slow breath. "She said," I repeated. I let her take the lead, he admitted. There it was. Not full responsibility, but closer. "What did you do, Ethan?" I asked. He hesitated. Then he answered. "I redirected your mail," he said. The words landed like stones. "I handled your online accounts," he added. "Moved things around, small amounts at first. I didn't react, not outwardly. Then when you got sick," he continued, his voice lowering. "She said it was the right moment. The right moment." The phrase echoed again, like something rehearsed. "She arranged the notary," he said. "The witnesses, everything. I was there when you signed." I closed my eyes, not to escape it, but to see it clearly. The room, the voices, the pen in my hand. "You knew I wasn't fully aware," I said. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer immediately. Then, "Yes." The word barely left his mouth, but it was enough. It was everything. "And the house," I asked. "We pushed it through fast," he said. "Kyle handled the buyer side. We priced it low so it would move quickly without scrutiny." "Without scrutiny," I repeated. He nodded weakly. "I told myself we'd fix it later," he said. "That once everything stabilized, we'd make it right somehow." How I asked again. He looked up at me, and this time, there was no answer at all, just emptiness. Because even now, he couldn't explain it. Because there had never been a real plan. Just hope. Just avoidance. Just delay. "I didn't think you'd fight it," he said quietly. I nodded once. "I know." He swallowed hard. "I thought you'd trust me." The words almost broke on the way out. And for a moment, I saw him. Not as the man who had done this, but as the boy who once believed I would always forgive him. I did trust you, I said. His eyes closed. I know, he whispered. Silence stretched between us, long, heavy. Then he spoke again. Brittany, she's not going to stop, he said. I looked at him. What do you mean she's already talking about next steps, he continued. Legal defenses, positioning. She's saying we need to protect ourselves. Ourselves, not me, never me. And you, I asked. He hesitated. I don't know anymore, he admitted. That was the first honest thing he had said that wasn't about the past. I can't keep pretending this was okay, he added. I studied him carefully, because this moment mattered. Not for redemption, not yet, but for truth. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. He met my eyes, and for the first time, there was no strategy in his expression, no calculation, just something raw. Because I don't want to lose you completely, he said. The words hung in the air, fragile, late but real. I let them sit. Then I spoke. You already did, I said gently. He flinched. Not dramatically, but enough, because the truth, when spoken calmly, cuts deeper. I'm still here, I added, but what you're asking for, that trust, that closeness, that's gone. His eyes filled, but he didn't look away. I know, he said. And for the first time, he didn't argue. He didn't defend. He didn't try to reshape the narrative. He just accepted it. And in that acceptance, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not resolution, but reality. And reality was finally catching up to him. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. There's a kind of chill that settles into a room when truth is no longer private, when it's placed under bright lights, examined, challenged, and stripped of comfort. I felt it the moment I walked in. Maggie was beside me, her posture straight, her expression composed in a way that suggested complete control, not over the outcome, but over the process. Grace sat a few rows behind us, quiet, observant, her presence steady and grounding. Across the room, Ethan and Brittany. Brittany looked exactly as she always did, perfect, composed, impeccably dressed, her expression calm, almost detached, as if this were just another situation to navigate. Ethan, on the other hand, looked like he hadn't slept. His shoulders were slightly slumped, his eyes tired, his focus drifting in a way that told me he was no longer certain where this was going. That mattered, because uncertainty breaks people faster than pressure. Ready, Maggie asked quietly. I nodded, yes, and for the first time since all of this began, I meant it. The hearing started with formalities, names, case numbers, procedural language that felt distant from the reality of what had happened. But then, the facts began. Maggie stood first, calm, precise, controlled. Your Honor, she began. This case concerns the unauthorized transfer of property belonging to my client, Paisley Carter, under conditions that strongly suggest coercion, incapacity, and coordinated financial exploitation. No emotion, no dramatics, just truth, layered carefully, strategically. She outlined the timeline. My hospitalization, the rapid execution of documents, the sale of my home below market value, the connection between the buyer and Brittany's brother. Each point landed with quiet weight. Then came the medical records. Maggie presented them clearly. Dates, medications, clinical observations. She was not in a position to provide informed consent, Maggie stated firmly. I watched the judge's expression. Not reactive, but attentive. Listening. Processing. That was enough. Then Brittany's attorney stood. He was smooth, confident, exactly what I expected. Your Honor, he began. This is a family matter being reframed as something more sinister than it is. Family. Always that word. He continued. Miss Carter willingly signed the documents. There is no evidence of force, no evidence of fraud, only regret after the fact. Regret. I almost felt something at that. Almost. But Maggie didn't react. She simply waited. Because this wasn't about reacting. It was about revealing. And furthermore, he added her current claims about incapacity are inconsistent with the documentation signed at the time. There it was. The attempt to turn my vulnerability into doubt. Maggie stood again. May I respond, Your Honor? The judge nodded. Proceed. Maggie walked forward slightly, and then she began dismantling everything. Not emotionally, not aggressively, precisely. She introduced the signature analysis, the inconsistencies, the shakiness that aligned with medical impairment. Then the financial tracing, the layered accounts, the transfers, the connection to Brittany, the connection to Kyle. Each piece building on the last, not loud but undeniable. Then she paused, and I knew something was coming. Your Honor, Maggie said there is one more element we would like to introduce. She turned slightly, and for the first time, looked directly at Brittany. Evidence of premeditation. The word echoed in the room. Brittany's expression didn't change, but her posture did, just slightly. Maggie continued. A recorded conversation between the involved parties obtained legally and in coordination with counsel in which Miss Carter's daughter-in-law references knowledge of estate planning decisions that had not been disclosed. The room felt still, sharp, focused. Maggie didn't rush. She let the weight of that settle. Then she continued. Specifically, a reference to potential changes in a trust information that could not have been known unless there had been prior discussion planning or assumption regarding the disposition of Miss Carter's assets. Silence, not empty, full, because now, this wasn't about interpretation. It was about intention. Brittany's attorney stood quickly. Objection overruled, the judge said calmly. Just like that, the momentum shifted. Maggie stepped back slightly, and the silence that followed was different, because the truth had moved from suggestion to structure. Brittany leaned toward her attorney, whispering something sharply. Ethan sat still, completely still, like someone who had just realized the ground beneath him wasn't stable anymore. Then Brittany stood, unprompted. I'd like to respond, she said. Her voice was steady, controlled, but there was something underneath it now, something tighter. The judge regarded her for a moment. Proceed. She turned slightly, facing forward. Not me, not Ethan, the room. This narrative she began is being built on assumptions and emotional interpretation. Her tone was sharp, measured, but the reality is simple, she continued. We acted in what we believed was Paisley's best interest. Best interest. Again, we saw a situation that required action, she said, and we took responsibility when she could not. I watched her, carefully, because this was who she really was. Not the polished surface, not the careful smiles. This, controlled, strategic, unapologetic. And any suggestion of premeditation, she added, is being exaggerated beyond reason. Maggie didn't move. Didn't react, because she didn't need to. The evidence was already there. Brittany finished, sat down, and the room shifted again. Not dramatically, but enough. Because something had changed, not just in the case, but in perception. This wasn't about misunderstanding anymore. It wasn't about confusion. It was about choices. And those choices were now visible. The judge spoke, calm, measured, but final in tone. Based on the evidence presented, he said the court will move to freeze the property in question pending further review. My breath caught slightly. Not from shock, from release. Additionally, he continued, there is sufficient cause to examine the circumstances surrounding the transaction more closely. Closer, deeper, more thoroughly. Exactly where truth lives. The gavel didn't need to fall loudly. The impact was already there. Because in that moment, everything they had built quietly began to come apart. The courtroom didn't erupt when the judge finished speaking. There was no dramatic gasp, no sudden outcry, just a shift, a quiet, undeniable shift. Because when a decision like that is made, when the structure holding a lie begins to crack, it doesn't need noise. It needs gravity. And I felt it settle into the room like weight. The property was frozen, the sale no longer secure. And more importantly, everything was now under scrutiny. Maggie leaned slightly toward me. That's exactly what we needed, she said under her breath. I nodded, but I didn't look at her. I was looking across the room, at them. Brittany sat perfectly still, her posture straight, her expression controlled, but her eyes had changed. The calm surface was still there, but beneath it, calculation. Fast, reactive, adjusting. Ethan, on the other hand, looked like he had been hollowed out. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just stared forward as if trying to process something that refused to settle into place. The hearing adjourned. People began to stand, papers shuffled, voices returned. But for me, everything felt quiet, focused. Because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the unraveling. As we stepped out into the hallway, Maggie turned to me. They're going to push back hard now, she said. Expect resistance, possibly escalation. I'm ready, I replied. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. I know. Grace joined us a moment later. That went well, she said simply. Well enough to open everything Maggie added. Grace glanced toward the far end of the hallway. They're coming, she said quietly. I turned. Ethan and Brittany were walking toward us, together, but not in sync. Brittany's stride was sharp, controlled, purposeful. Ethan's slower, uneven, like someone being pulled forward rather than choosing to walk. They stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak, far enough to avoid crossing an invisible line. This didn't have to happen, Brittany said. No greeting, no pretense, just accusation. Maggie didn't respond. Grace didn't move. I stepped slightly forward. Yes, I said calmly. It did. Brittany's eyes narrowed slightly. You're making this worse than it is, she said. Dragging it into court involving outsiders? It was already worse than it looked, I replied. Her jaw tightened. You're being influenced, she said sharply. You don't fully understand the legal complexity of what's happening. I almost smiled, because that was her strategy now. Undermine, reframe, control the narrative. I understand enough, I said. Ethan shifted beside her. Brittany, he started, but she cut him off. No, she needs to hear this, she said, her voice tightening. We did what needed to be done. We took responsibility when no one else would. No, I said quietly. You took control when no one asked you to. Silence. Brief. Sharp. Brittany stepped closer, her voice lowered. You think you've won something here, she said. But this isn't over. I know, I replied. That seemed to catch her off guard, because she expected resistance, emotion, fear, not calm. Then you should reconsider how far you want to take this, she said. I held her gaze. All the way I answered. The words didn't need to be loud. They just needed to be true. For a moment, something flickered in her expression. Not doubt, not fear, something else, annoyance, because she realized I wasn't reacting the way she expected. And when someone can't predict you, they lose leverage. She turned sharply. And you, she said, looking at Ethan, we need to go. But Ethan didn't move. Not immediately. He stood there, looking at me, then at her, then back at me. He started. Brittany's voice cut in colder now. Ethan, a warning, clear, direct. He hesitated. And in that hesitation, I saw it. The fracture, not complete, not final, but there. He turned toward her, but not fully. I'll be there in a minute, he said quietly. Her eyes sharpened. No, she said. You'll come now. The tension between them was no longer subtle. It was visible, unavoidable. I said I'll be there, he repeated, softer but firmer. Brittany stared at him for a long moment. Then she exhaled sharply. Fine, she said, and walked away, just like that. No softness, no hesitation, no looking back. And in that moment, everything became clear. Not just to me, to him, because love doesn't leave like that, but convenience does. Ethan stood there, watching her go, and for the first time, he didn't follow immediately. He turned back to me. His face, different now. Not defensive, not controlled, just exposed. She's going to fight this, he said. I know, I replied. She won't back down, he added. I know, I repeated. He swallowed. I don't think I can do this anymore. There it was. Not a declaration, not a decision, but a crack, the beginning of separation. Then don't, I said. He looked at me, as if expecting more, instructions, guidance, permission, but I gave him none, because this was his choice. I didn't see it clearly before he said quietly, not all of it. I didn't respond, because clarity doesn't come from explanation. It comes from consequence. She's already blaming me, he added, saying I didn't handle things properly, that I hesitated, that I made mistakes. I tilted my head slightly. And did you? I asked. He let out a small, bitter breath. Yes, he said. Honesty. Finally. She said we need to protect ourselves, he continued, that we need to prepare for what's coming. Ourselves. Again. Always that word. And what do you want to do? I asked. He hesitated, then answered. I don't know. That was the truth. And for once, it wasn't hidden. We stood there in silence, not comfortable, not easy, but real. Then I said something I hadn't planned to say. Ethan. He looked up. This isn't about sides, I said. It's about truth. He nodded slowly. I know. And truth doesn't need protection, I added. Only lies do. The words settled into him. I could see it. The way they landed, the way they stayed. I should go, he said finally. Yes, I replied. He took a step back, then paused. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I'm not there yet," I answered. He nodded. "I understand." And this time, he meant it. He turned and walked away, not chasing after Brittany, not rushing, just walking, alone. And as I watched him go, I didn't feel victory. Not satisfaction, not even relief. I felt something quieter, something deeper. The beginning of consequence. Because for the first time, he wasn't standing beside her. He was standing in what he had done. And there is no place more honest than that. The first time I stepped back into my house, I didn't feel relief. I felt distance. It was still mine. Legally, finally, undeniably mine again. But something inside it had shifted. Or maybe something inside me had. Maggie had called me 2 days earlier with the update. The court has issued a ruling to void the transaction pending final findings, she said. You can return home. Just like that. A sentence I had waited for. A sentence that should have felt like victory. But as I stood in front of my front door keys in hand, I hesitated. 42 years. That's how long I had lived there. Raised Ethan. Loved my husband. Built a life inside those walls. And yet, I found myself taking a breath before turning the key. Because I wasn't walking back into the same place I had left. I opened the door and stepped inside. The air felt different. Still. Quiet. But not the kind of quiet that brings peace. The kind that follows disruption. I stood there for a moment, just inside the doorway, letting my eyes adjust. Nothing was destroyed. Nothing was broken. But everything felt touched, moved, altered. There were boxes, not everywhere, but enough, neatly stacked along one wall of the living room, labeled, organized, prepared, for what for sale, for staging, for removal. I walked slowly across the room, each step deliberate, measured, like I was learning the space again. The couch was still there, but the pillows had been replaced, neutral colors, generic, the kind you see in model homes. The photographs on the mantel were gone. I stopped. My chest tightened. They hadn't thrown them away. No, that would have been too obvious, too careless. They had packed them, removed them, as if my life was something that could be temporarily set aside to make the house more appealing, more valuable, more sellable. I turned toward the hallway. The walls felt longer, the silence deeper. I walked into the kitchen. Everything was clean, too clean, surfaces cleared, personal items reduced. Even the small things, the ceramic bowl I kept by the sink, the magnets on the refrigerator, were gone. Replaced with simplicity, with neutrality, with absence. I rested my hand lightly on the counter. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something rise. Not anger, not grief. Something quieter. Something more complex, violation, not physical, not loud, but present. Because this wasn't just about what they had taken. It was about what they had decided didn't matter. I moved down the hallway. Each room held the same story. Not destruction, but removal. Careful, intentional, calculated. My bedroom door was slightly open. I pushed it gently. The bed was made, but not the way I made it. The sheets were different. The pillows arranged with symmetry instead of comfort. And on the dresser, empty space where my jewelry box had been. I stepped closer, opened the drawer. There it was, placed neatly inside, organized, contained, as if my personal things had been categorized into something manageable, something temporary, something that could be put back later, if needed. I closed the drawer slowly and sat down on the edge of the bed. For a long moment, I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't react. I just sat. Because sometimes the weight of what's been done to you doesn't come all at once. It settles, piece by piece, room by room, memory by memory, and you have to feel it fully before you can move forward. A soft knock came from the front door. I blinked, grounding myself, then stood and walked back down the hallway. Grace stood outside when I opened it. "You made it back," she said. "I did," I replied. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room briefly. "Looks like they were preparing for a quick turnaround," she observed. "Yes," I said quietly. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked beside me as I moved through the house again. Not leading, not directing, just present. "They treated it like inventory," I said after a while. Grace nodded. "That's how people like this operate," she said. "They separate emotion from value." I stopped in the living room. "And what about the people I asked?" She looked at me. "They do the same," she said. I let that settle, because it explained everything. Later that evening, after Grace left, I sat alone in the house. Not in the living room, not in the bedroom, but in the small space by the window where I used to sit in the mornings, with coffee, with quiet, with peace. The chair was still there, untouched, unchanged. I sat down, and for the first time, it felt familiar, not perfect, not untouched, but mine. I looked around slowly, at the walls, at the space, at what remained, and what had been taken, and what had been returned. Because this wasn't about restoring everything to how it was. That wasn't possible. Too much had changed. Too much had been revealed. But it was about something else. Reclaiming, not just the house, but the right to decide what happens inside it. I reached for my phone, opened my contacts, and began making changes. Legal changes, medical directives, financial access. Every document, every permission, every point of control, removed, rewritten, reassigned. Ethan's name was no longer anywhere on that list. Not out of anger, not out of punishment, but out of clarity. Because trust isn't rebuilt by ignoring what happened. It's rebuilt by protecting what remains. When I finished, I set the phone down and leaned back in the chair. The sun was setting outside the window, soft light filling the room, and for the first time since I woke up in that hospital bed, I felt something steady. Not joy, not relief, something deeper. Ownership. Not just of the house, but of myself, because what they had taken wasn't just property. It was agency, voice, control, and now I had taken it back. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. The first morning I woke up in my house again, I didn't rush out of bed. I didn't check my phone. I didn't try to organize anything. I just lay there, listening. There's a sound a home makes when it's truly yours. It's not loud, not obvious. It's the absence of intrusion, the absence of control, the absence of someone else deciding what happens inside your walls. And for the first time in weeks, I heard it again. Stillness, peace. Not perfect peace, but honest peace. I got up slowly, walking through the house in soft morning light. Some things were still out of place. Some things still needed to be returned, rearranged, reclaimed. But I didn't feel rushed, because this time, everything would happen on my terms. I made coffee, the same way I always had. Measured, uncomplicated, familiar. And I carried it to the chair by the window, sat down, and let the sunlight touch my hands. That's when I realized something. I wasn't the same woman who had collapsed in that house weeks ago, and I wasn't the same woman who had woken up in that hospital bed. Something had changed. Not broken, changed. Because there's a difference between being hurt and being altered by what hurt you. Later that week, I took my first step outside of my own story, not to escape it, but to use it. Grace had introduced me to a local group, an elder protection network, women, men, people who had experienced things similar to mine, financial manipulation, emotional control, quiet theft disguised as care. I listened at first, more than I spoke, because every story carried something familiar, a moment of doubt, a moment of realization, a moment where everything changed. And slowly, I began to speak. Not about revenge, not about anger, but about awareness, about boundaries, about the importance of asking questions even when the person standing in front of you is someone you love, especially then. Maggie helped me establish a small fund soon after. Nothing public, nothing dramatic, just enough to support legal assistance for people who couldn't afford to fight back on their own. Because I knew now how easily people can be silenced when they feel alone, and how powerful it is to know you're not. Ethan wrote to me 3 weeks after the court hearing, a letter, not a call, not a message, a letter. I recognized his handwriting immediately, familiar, careful, almost hesitant. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the table for a full day, not out of avoidance, out of choice, because I no longer reacted, I decided. When I finally opened it, I read it slowly, every word. He didn't try to defend himself, not this time. He didn't blame Brittany. He didn't explain away his actions. He simply acknowledged them. I don't expect forgiveness, he wrote, but I needed to tell you that I see it now, all of it. And I'm sorry not for what happened to me, but for what I chose to do to you. That line stayed with me, not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first time he had taken full responsibility. He wrote that Brittany had left, that the legal pressure had become too much, that once things started unraveling, she shifted quickly, distancing herself, protecting her own interests. That didn't surprise me. It confirmed what I had already seen. She'd never been standing beside him, only beside the outcome. He said he was living in a small apartment now, working, trying to rebuild, not asking for anything, just acknowledging. At the end, he wrote, "If there's ever a place for me in your life again, I'll wait for it. If there isn't, I understand." I folded the letter carefully, set it down, and sat there for a long time, because forgiveness is not a simple thing. It's not a switch. It's not a decision made in a single moment. It's a process, a quiet internal one. And I realized something important. I didn't need to decide everything at once. I didn't need to restore what had been lost. I only needed to decide what I would allow moving forward. That evening, I wrote back. Not a long letter, not emotional, but clear. "Ethan, I hear what you're saying, and I believe that you see things more clearly now. But understanding what you did doesn't undo what was done. I'm not closing the door completely, but I'm not opening it either. Forgiveness is not the same as access, and trust is not something that returns because we want it to. Take responsibility for your life. Build something honest. That's where your future is. As for us, time will decide what's possible." I sealed the envelope, and that was enough. Not cold, not cruel, just honest. Weeks passed, then months. The house slowly became mine again, not just legally, but emotionally. The photos returned to the walls. The kitchen filled with small, familiar clutter. The spaces softened, lived in, real. And one evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip low into the horizon, I felt something settle inside me. Not closure, not completely, but something close to it. A quiet understanding, because survival isn't just about getting through something. It's about deciding who you are after it. And I knew who I was now. I wasn't the woman who had been managed, or overlooked, or taken from. I was the woman who saw, who acted, who reclaimed, and who chose carefully, deliberately what came next. I took a slow sip of my tea. The air was warm, the world quiet, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for something to happen. I was simply living. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from being betrayed by someone you love, not because of what was taken, but because of what was broken. Trust is not just belief, it is a form of safety. And when that safety is violated, the damage goes deeper than anything material ever could. But here is the truth many people are afraid to face. Growing older does not mean becoming powerless. Kindness does not mean surrender, and love does not mean allowing yourself to be harmed. You can care about someone and still set boundaries. You can forgive someone and still protect yourself. And most importantly, you can lose something deeply meaningful and still rebuild a life that is fully yours. What happened to me was not just about a house. It was about control, voice, dignity, and reclaiming those things required something stronger than anger. It required clarity. If you're watching this, and something feels wrong in your life, if someone is making decisions for you, instead of with you, pay attention to that feeling. It is not weakness, it is awareness. And awareness is where protection begins. You deserve to be heard, you deserve to be respected, and you deserve to decide what happens to your life. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a situation where trust was broken? How did you handle it? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I read every comment. And if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. You're not alone, and your voice matters.